Lila Carter tore the faded notice from the post with trembling hands. Cook wanted. Ridge Hollow Ranch. Room and wages provided. While behind her, 3 children huddled silent in a broken wagon beneath a merciless sun. The bruise on 6-year-old Noah's temple, left by his father's fist 3 nights ago, was still purple and swollen. That was the night Gideon nearly killed their son. The night Lila stopped surviving and started running. If he found them before summer ended, the heat wouldn't be what destroyed them. He would. With nothing but a stubborn mule and fading hope, she turned toward Ridge Hollow, praying silently for just one summer of shelter before the devil caught up. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels, and if it grabs you, hit that like button and stay until the end. This one's worth it. The sun hung white and brutal over the flat stretch of prairie that led to Ridge Hollow, turning the dust into something that stuck to skin and lungs alike. Lila Carter sat rigid on the wagon bench, reins wrapped tight around blistered palms, eyes fixed on the hazy outline of buildings in the distance. Sweat traced lines down her temples. Her dress clung to her back. She didn't wipe either away. She just drove. Behind her, pressed into the splintered bed of the wagon, her 3 children sat in silence. Clara, 13, held 8-year-old Eli's hand without looking at him. Her jaw was set in that hard, stubborn way she'd learned too young. The way that said she'd stopped expecting comfort and started expecting survival. Eli stared at the horizon with dark, unreadable eyes, his thin shoulders squared like he was bracing for impact. And Noah, the youngest at 6, leaned against Clara's side with his knees drawn up, one small hand pressed to the bruise that spread purple and sickly across his left temple. The bruise Gideon had left 3 nights ago. Lila's throat tightened. She swallowed hard and kept driving. The mule, old and stubborn and half lame, plodded forward with the kind of weary determination that mirrored her own. Everything they owned was tied down in the wagon bed. 2 trunks, a water barrel, a cast iron skillet, quilts that smelled like smoke and fear. It wasn't much, but it was all they had, and if this didn't work, if Ridge Hollow turned them away, she didn't know what came next. The notice was still folded in her apron pocket. She'd torn it from a post outside a fading town 2 days back, hands shaking so hard she'd nearly ripped it in half. Cook wanted for the summer. Ridge Hollow Ranch, room and wages provided. Inquire with Mason Hale. She'd read it 3 times before she believed it was real. A job, shelter, wages, 1 summer. That was all she needed. Just long enough to disappear. Just long enough to figure out where to go next before Gideon came looking. Because he would come looking. Men like Gideon always did. The ranch came into sharper focus as they drew closer. A wide, sturdy house with a deep porch and whitewashed rails. A barn that looked solid and well-kept. Fencing that stretched out in clean lines across golden fields. Cattle grazed in the distance. A windmill turned lazily against the sky. It looked steady, calm, like the kind of place where people slept through the night without one eye open. Lila's chest ached at the sight of it. She pulled the wagon to a stop near the barn and sat for a moment, just breathing. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs and forced herself to still. "Mama?" Clara's voice was quiet. Careful. Lila turned in her seat and met her daughter's eyes, sharp and watchful and far too old for 13. "Stay here," Lila said softly. "All of you. Don't get down unless I say." Clara nodded once. Eli didn't move. Noah's fingers curled tighter against the bruise. Lila climbed down from the wagon, legs unsteady beneath her, and brushed the dust from her skirt as best she could. Her hair was tangled and damp with sweat. Her face was streaked with grime. She looked like what she was, a woman running with everything she had left. She straightened her shoulders and walked toward the house. Before she reached the porch, the door opened. A man stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 40, with sun-darkened skin and hands that looked like they'd built half the ranch themselves. His hair was dark, touched with gray at the temples, and his eyes, steady, serious, the kind that didn't miss much, settled on her without surprise. Mason Hale. It had to be. He didn't smile, but he didn't frown either. He just stood there, one hand resting on the porch rail, watching her with the kind of patience that made her feel seen in a way that was almost unbearable. "Mr. Hale," Lila's voice came out steadier than she expected. "That's right. I'm here about the notice, the cook position." His gaze shifted past her to the wagon, to the children sitting silent in the bed, to the mule that looked ready to collapse. Back to her. "Notice said cook," he said quietly. "Didn't say anything about a family." Lila's stomach dropped. She lifted her chin. "I know, but I'm a good cook. I'll work sunrise to sundown. I won't ask for anything extra, just—" Her voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. "Just one summer, room and wages. That's all I need." Mason was silent for a long moment. Then he stepped down from the porch, boots crunching softly against the dirt, and walked past her toward the wagon. Lila's heart hammered. She turned, watching as he approached the children. Clara stood up in the wagon bed, chin high, shoulders back, positioning herself between Mason and her brothers. Eli moved behind her without being told. Noah stayed seated, one hand still pressed to his bruise, eyes wide and wary. Mason stopped a few feet away and looked at them, really looked, taking in the exhaustion, the fear, the bruise on Noah's face that no child should carry. When he spoke, his voice was low and gentle. "You all hungry?" Eli blinked. Clara's mouth opened, then closed. Noah nodded. Mason looked back at Lila. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened, just a fraction. "You cook like you say you can?" "Yes, sir." "You run from something?" Lila's breath caught. She held his gaze and didn't lie. "Yes." Mason nodded slowly. He turned back to the children. "You three like biscuits?" Noah's face lit up for the first time in days. "Yes, sir." "Good," Mason said. "Your mama makes biscuits tonight. You'll get first pick. Sound fair?" Clara's shoulders dropped just slightly. Eli nodded. Mason looked at Lila again. "You don't sleep in the barn. You sleep in the house. Kids, too. There's 2 spare rooms upstairs. You take them." Lila's throat closed up entirely. She couldn't speak. Mason gestured toward the house. "Get them settled. I'll bring your things in, then we'll talk wages." He walked back toward the wagon, already reaching for the first trunk. Lila stood frozen for a heartbeat longer. Then she turned to her children and nodded. Clara climbed down first, helping Noah after her. Eli followed close behind, moving like a shadow. They walked toward the house together, silent and careful, like they didn't quite believe it yet. Lila stayed where she was, watching Mason lift the trunk like it weighed nothing, watching the way he moved, steady, deliberate, without expectation or demand. For the first time in 3 days, the knot in her chest loosened, just a little. The house was cooler inside, with windows open to catch the breeze and floors that didn't creak under their weight. It smelled like wood and coffee and something faintly sweet, cinnamon, maybe, or dried apples. The kitchen was large and well kept, with a black iron stove, a sturdy table, shelves lined with jars and tins. Lila stood in the doorway and tried not to cry. Mason set the trunk down near the stairs and straightened. "Rooms are up there. You take whichever ones suit you. I'll bring the rest." "Mr. Hale." "Mason," he said quietly. She swallowed. "Mason, I can't thank you enough." He looked at her for a moment, then shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. Just make sure those biscuits are worth it." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Lila felt something break loose inside her chest. Not fear, not panic, relief. She nodded. "They will be." By the time the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, the children were upstairs in their rooms, Clara and Noah in one, Eli in the smaller room across the hall. Lila had unpacked what little they had, smoothed quilts over beds that didn't sag, opened windows that let in air that didn't taste like dust and desperation. Downstairs, she stood at the stove and made biscuits. Her hands moved on instinct: flour, lard, buttermilk, salt. She didn't measure. She didn't need to. She'd made biscuits in worse kitchens with less than this. She'd made them while Gideon raged in the next room, while bruises bloomed on her ribs, while her children learned to be silent. But tonight, her hands were steady. The dough came together smooth and soft. She rolled it out, cut rounds, laid them in the pan, slid them into the oven. Mason came in as the smell began to fill the kitchen. He didn't say anything, just poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove and sat down at the table, watching her work. Lila glanced at him. "You always this quiet?" "Most days." "That work for you?" "So far." She almost smiled. The biscuits came out golden and perfect. She set them on the table with butter and honey, then called the children down. They came slowly, like they still weren't sure this was real. Mason gestured to the chairs. "Sit." They did. Lila watched as Noah reached for a biscuit, his small fingers careful, eyes darting to her like he was asking permission. She nodded. He took one, broke it open, spread butter across the steaming halves. When he bit into it, his eyes went wide. "Mama," he whispered. "It's good." Clara ate hers in silence, but her shoulders softened. Eli took two and didn't look up. Mason took one last, bit into it, chewed slowly. Then he looked at Lila. "You're hired." Lila's breath caught. "Wages are $15 a month," Mason continued. "Meals included. Rooms are yours as long as you need them. You cook breakfast, dinner, and supper. Keep the kitchen clean. Help with preserving when the garden comes in. Rest is up to you." Lila nodded, unable to speak. Mason's gaze shifted to the children. "You three want to earn your keep too. That's fine, but you're not required. You're just kids." Noah looked at him with wide, wondering eyes. "Can I help with the horses?" "If your mama says it's all right." Lila's throat burned. "It's all right." Mason nodded. "Then we'll start tomorrow." He stood, draining the last of his coffee, and headed for the door. Lila found her voice. "Mason?" He paused, hand on the doorframe. "Thank you." He didn't turn around. "Just make good on those biscuits, Mrs. Carter. That'll be thanks enough." The door closed softly behind him. Lila sat down at the table with her children and let herself breathe. For the first time in years, she wasn't bracing for the next blow. The days that followed fell into a rhythm Lila hadn't known in so long she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. She woke before dawn and lit the stove, made coffee strong and black the way Mason liked it, cooked eggs and bacon and fried potatoes, biscuits and gravy, flapjacks with butter and syrup. She set the table and called the children down, and they ate together in the cool, quiet hours before the sun turned brutal. Mason worked the ranch with the kind of steady determination that reminded her of the mule, relentless, patient, unflinching. He mended fences, tended cattle, fixed what broke. And when Noah started following him around like a shadow, Mason didn't send him away. He let the boy help. Clara took to the kitchen like she'd been waiting for permission to be useful. She peeled potatoes without being asked, kneaded dough, stirred pots, and when Lila told her she didn't have to, Clara just shook her head. "I want to, Mama." Eli was quieter, watchful. He stayed close to the house, eyes always scanning the horizon like he was waiting for something to come over it. Lila understood. She was waiting too. But the days stretched long and hot and uneventful, and slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, the tension in her shoulders began to ease. One evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, Mason came in from the barn and found her on the porch, shelling peas into a bowl. He sat down on the step beside her without asking. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Mason said, "You don't talk much about where you came from." Lila's hands stilled. "No." "Don't have to. Just figured I'd say, whatever you're running from, it doesn't follow you here unless you let it." She looked at him. His face was calm, steady, like he'd seen hard things and survived them without bitterness. "What if I can't stop it?" she asked quietly. "Then you don't stop it alone." Lila's throat tightened. Mason stood, brushing dust from his jeans. "Supper smells good. It'll be ready soon." He nodded and went inside. Lila sat there in the fading light, peas forgotten in her lap, and let herself believe just for a moment that maybe he was right. 3 weeks into summer, the letter appeared. Lila found it in the morning, tucked under a rock on the fence post near the road. No envelope, just a single piece of paper, folded once. Her name was scrawled across the front in handwriting she knew like her own heartbeat. Her hands went numb. She opened it. I know where you are. That was all. No threats. No demands. Just 5 words that made the world tilt sideways. Lila's knees buckled. She caught herself against the fence, vision swimming, breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He knew. Gideon knew. She crumpled the letter in her fist and stumbled back toward the house, heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Mason was in the barn. The children were still inside. She made it to the porch and sat down hard, pressing her forehead to her knees, trying to breathe. The door opened behind her. "Mama?" Claire's voice, soft, worried. Lila lifted her head, forcing her face into something calm. "I'm fine, sweetheart." Clara didn't look convinced. She sat down beside her mother, close enough that their shoulders touched. "He found us, didn't he?" Lila's chest cracked wide open. She turned to her daughter, this brave, fierce girl who'd held her brothers together while Lila fell apart, and saw the fear in her eyes. "Yes," Lila whispered. Clara's jaw tightened. "What do we do?" Lila looked out at the fields, at the ranch that had felt like safety for 3 fragile weeks, at the horizon where dust rose in the distance. "I don't know," she said. But even as she spoke, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't running anymore. Not this time. This time she would fight. Clara didn't move from her mother's side. The sun climbed higher, turning the porch boards warm beneath them, but neither woman nor girl seemed to notice. The crumpled letter sat between Lila's clenched fingers like a living thing, small, venomous, capable of destroying everything they'd found here. "Does Mason know?" Clara asked finally. Lila shook her head. "Not yet." "Are you going to tell him?" The question hung in the air. Lila stared out at the fields, watching the way the wheat moved in waves under the wind, golden and endless. 3 weeks ago, she would have packed the wagon in the dark and been gone by dawn. 3 weeks ago, running was the only answer she knew, but now there were biscuits cooling in the kitchen. Noah's laughter echoing from the barn. Eli's shoulders starting to relax when Mason spoke to him. Clara's hands steady and sure as she kneaded dough. Now there was something worth protecting. "Yes," Lila said quietly. "I have to." She found Mason an hour later in the barn, replacing a broken hinge on one of the stall doors. He worked with the focused precision of a man who knew his tools, who trusted his hands. Noah sat cross-legged in the hay nearby, watching with the kind of reverence children reserved for heroes. Mason looked up when Lila's shadow fell across the doorway. Something in her face made him set down the hammer immediately. "Noah," he said, voice even, "go help your sister in the kitchen." The boy scrambled to his feet without question and slipped past Lila, giving her a worried glance as he went. Mason waited until his footsteps faded. Then he straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans, eyes never leaving her face. "What happened?" Lila held out the letter. He took it, unfolded it, read the 5 words written there. His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "When did you find this?" "This morning, on the fence post by the road." Mason looked at the letter again, then back at her. "The man you're running from. He do that to Noah's face?" Lila's throat closed. She nodded. "He do worse?" She nodded again. Mason folded the letter carefully and handed it back to her. "What's his name?" "Gideon Carter." "Where's he from?" "Last I knew he was working claims outside Silverton, but he moves around, finds work, finds trouble." Her voice cracked. "Finds reasons to hurt people." Mason was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant, calculating. Then he looked at her directly. "You want to leave?" The question hit her like a fist. "It's all right if you do," Mason continued, his voice steady, without judgment. "I understand. Man like that comes looking, sometimes leaving's the only smart choice." Lila's hands shook. She clenched them into fists. 3 weeks ago, I would have been gone already. I would have hitched that mule and driven until the wheels fell off. "And now?" She met his eyes. "Now I don't want to run anymore. Now I want my children to sleep without nightmares. I want Clara to be 13 instead of 30. I want Eli to stop watching the door. I want Noah to know what it feels like when a man doesn't raise his hand." Her voice broke. "I want them to have one summer where they're not afraid." Mason held her gaze for a long, measured moment. Then he nodded once. Then they'll have it. He won't stop. I know. He'll bring men with him. He always does. Men who owe him money, men who owe him favors. I know. Mason, you don't understand. Gideon doesn't just hurt people. He ruins them. He'll burn this place to the ground if he thinks it'll get to me. Mason picked up the hammer, tested its weight in his palm, then set it down again with deliberate care. Mrs. Carter. Lila. His mouth quirked, almost a smile. Lila. I've built this ranch from nothing, survived droughts that killed half the county's cattle, rebuilt the barn after a twister took it down to the foundation. I'm still here. He paused. And I didn't survive all that just to let some bastard with a temper run a good woman and her children off my land. Lila felt something shift in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Why? She whispered. Why would you risk this for us? Mason looked at her like the answer should be obvious. Because it's the right thing to do. He said it so simply, like decency was just a fact, like standing between a woman and her demons was as natural as mending a fence or planting a field. Lila wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he didn't owe them this, wanted to protect him from what was coming. But the words wouldn't come. We'll need a plan, Mason said, already thinking ahead. He won't come alone and he won't come quiet. Men like that, they want an audience. They want people to see what happens when you cross them. What do we do? Mason looked out toward the road, his eyes narrowing against the glare. First, we make sure the children are safe. If it comes to a fight, they're not anywhere near it. They won't leave me. Then we don't give them a choice. He turned back to her. You know anyone in town? Anyone who'd take them for a few days if things get bad? Lila thought of the shopkeeper who'd sold her flour without asking questions. The woman at the boarding house who'd smiled at Clara. Maybe. There's a widow, runs a boarding house near the church. She seemed kind. Good. We'll talk to her, make arrangements. Mason crossed his arms, his expression settling into something hard and resolved. Second, we need to know when he's coming. He left that letter to scare you, make you run or make you sloppy. That means he's watching, probably has been for days. A chill ran down Lila's spine despite the heat. You think he's out there now? I think he wants you to think he is. Could be he's miles away. Could be he's just over that ridge. Mason's jaw tightened. Either way, we don't give him what he wants. What does he want? You, scared and alone. Mason's eyes were steady. So you stay right here, and you're not alone. Lila's breath shuddered out of her. She nodded. Mason picked up the hammer again, turning it over in his hands. Third, we get help. There's a sheriff in town, Daniels. He's a decent man, straight. I'll write in tomorrow. Let him know what's happening. Gideon has papers, Lila said quickly. Some kind of warrant. Claims I kidnapped the children. It's a lie, but it gives him legal cover. Mason's expression darkened. That's smart. Means he's not just coming with fists. He's coming with law on his side, or what looks like law. Then what good is the sheriff? Real law beats fake law. We just have to prove which is which. Mason set the hammer down with a solid thunk. You have anything? Anything that shows those kids are yours? That you left because you had to? Lila's mind raced. I have a letter from Gideon's brother Jacob. He tried to help me once, told me to leave before Gideon killed me. He wrote it down, said if I ever needed proof. Where's the letter? In my trunk. Upstairs. Get it. I'll take it to Daniels tomorrow. Mason's voice softened just slightly. Anything else? Anyone else who saw what he did? Lila thought of the women in Silverton who'd looked away when she walked past with bruises, the neighbors who'd heard her children crying and closed their windows, the doctor who'd set Noah's arm 2 years ago and written "fell from a horse" in his ledger without asking a single question. No, she said quietly. No one. Mason nodded, unsurprised. Then we build the case ourselves. The barn felt smaller suddenly, hotter. Lila pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. I don't know if I can do this. You already did the hard part, Mason said. You got them out. You kept them alive. Everything else is just details. Details that could get you killed. Mason met her eyes. I've been alone on this ranch for 5 years, Mrs. Carter. I wake up, I work, I sleep. I wake up again. That's not living. It's just not dying. He paused. Your kids laugh at supper now. Clara hums when she's cooking. Eli asked me yesterday if I'd teach him to ride. Noah told me a joke this morning. Terrible joke, but he told it. His voice roughened. That's living, and I'll be damned if I let some coward take that away. Lila's eyes burned. She blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. I don't know how to thank you. Don't, Mason said simply. Just keep making those biscuits. Despite everything, Lila almost smiled. Mason reached for his hat, settling it low over his eyes. I'll ride into town at first light. Talk to Daniels, see what we're working with. He paused at the barn door, looking back at her. Don't tell the kids yet. Not until we know more. Clara already knows. Mason's mouth tightened. She's sharp. She's had to be. Then tell her to keep her brothers close, and tell her... He stopped, choosing his words carefully. Tell her she doesn't have to be the grown-up anymore. That's my job now. Lila's throat closed completely. Mason nodded once and walked out into the sunlight, leaving her standing in the cool shadows of the barn with a crumpled letter in her hand and something fragile and dangerous blooming in her chest. Hope. That night, Lila cooked supper with Clara at her side, the two of them moving around the kitchen in practiced rhythm. Chicken and dumplings, green beans cooked with bacon, cornbread golden and crumbling. The children ate quietly, sensing the tension even if they didn't understand its source. Mason sat at the head of the table, his presence steady and solid. When Noah asked if he could help with the horses again tomorrow, Mason said yes. When Eli asked if the creek was deep enough to swim in, Mason said they'd check it out after chores. When Clara started clearing plates without being asked, Mason told her to sit back down and finish her cornbread. You cooked it, he said. You get to enjoy it. Clara blinked, surprised, and sat. After supper, Mason went out to check the fences one more time. Lila watched him from the kitchen window, his silhouette dark against the fading light, and felt the weight of what they were facing settle over her like a blanket. Clara came to stand beside her. He's going to help us, isn't he? Yes. Even though it's dangerous? Yes. Clara was quiet for a moment. I like him, Mama. Lila's hand found her daughter's shoulder. So do I, sweetheart. Do you think we'll be safe here? Lila wanted to lie, wanted to promise her daughter that everything would be fine, that Gideon would never find them, that this summer would stretch on forever with nothing but sunshine and biscuits and laughter. But Clara deserved the truth. I think we're going to fight like hell to be safe here, Lila said quietly. And I think Mason's going to fight with us. Clara nodded, her young face solemn. Good. I'm tired of running. Me too, baby. Me too. Mason left for town before dawn, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the gray light. Lila stood on the porch with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands, watching until he disappeared over the ridge. The children were still asleep. The house was quiet. The world felt suspended, holding its breath. Lila went inside and climbed the stairs to her room. She pulled the trunk from beneath the bed and opened it, digging through layers of clothing and keepsakes until her fingers found the envelope at the bottom. Jacob's letter. She pulled it out, hands shaking, and unfolded the worn paper. Lila, if you're reading this, it means you finally got smart and left. I should have helped you sooner. I should have stood up to him years ago. I didn't, and I'll carry that shame until I die. Gideon's dangerous, you know that. But what you might not know is that he's gotten worse since the mine closed. He's drinking more, owing money to men who don't forgive debt. He's desperate, and desperate men do terrible things. You need to disappear. Take the kids and go somewhere he won't think to look. Don't tell anyone where you're going, not even me. Just go. If he comes after you, if he tries to use the law or his fists or anything else to drag you back, you show someone this letter. You tell them what he did to Noah, what he did to you. You tell them Jacob Carter says his brother is a violent man who shouldn't be within 100 miles of his own family. I'm sorry I wasn't braver. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. But you protect those kids now. You run, and you don't look back. Jacob Lila read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket. It wasn't much, but it was something. She went back downstairs and started breakfast. The routine steadied her, cracking eggs, slicing bacon, stirring grits. By the time the children came down, the kitchen smelled like butter and salt and safety. Eli was the first to notice Mason's absence. "Where is he?" "Town," Lila said, keeping her voice light. "He'll be back this afternoon." Eli frowned, but didn't push. Clara shot her mother a look that said she knew there was more to the story. Lila gave her a small shake of her head. "Not now." They ate in relative silence. Afterward, Lila sent the boys out to feed the chickens and told Clara to help her with the laundry. They worked side by side at the wash basin, scrubbing shirts and sheets, wringing them out, hanging them on the line to dry in the relentless sun. "Mama," Clara said quietly, glancing toward the yard to make sure her brothers were out of earshot. "What's going to happen when he comes?" Lila's hands stilled in the soapy water. "I don't know, sweetheart." "Are we going to fight him?" "If we have to." Clara bit her lip. "I'm scared." Lila set down the shirt she was washing and turned to face her daughter fully. She cupped Clara's face in her damp hands, looking into eyes that had seen too much, endured too much. "I'm scared too," Lila said, "but I'm more scared of what happens if we keep running. I'm scared of you growing up thinking this is all you deserve. I'm scared of Eli learning that men settle things with fists. I'm scared of Noah forgetting what it feels like to be safe." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "What if Mason gets hurt because of us?" "Then we make sure he doesn't fight alone." "How?" Lila thought of Jacob's letter, of Sheriff Daniels, of the fragile network of people who might, just might, stand between them and Gideon's rage. "We find people who believe us," Lila said. "We tell the truth. And we don't back down." Clara nodded, swallowing hard. "Okay. Okay." They went back to the laundry, hands moving in rhythm, the clean smell of soap rising around them like a prayer. Mason returned just after noon, his horse lathered and tired. Lila met him at the barn, heart pounding. "Well?" Mason dismounted, leading the horse into the shade. "Daniels is a good man, straight as they come. He'll help." Relief flooded through her. "What did he say?" "He said the warrant Gideon's carrying is from a county jurisdiction that doesn't have any authority here. It's real enough to fool someone who doesn't look close, but it won't hold up under scrutiny." Mason pulled the saddle off his horse, his movements efficient. "Daniels is going to file a counterclaim, protective order, allegations of abuse, the works. Jacob's letter helps. A lot." "So we have law on our side?" "We have law. Whether it's enough." Mason's jaw tightened. "Gideon's not going to care about paperwork. He's going to come anyway. The difference is now we have legal standing to defend ourselves." Lila's stomach twisted. "When do you think he'll come?" "Soon. That letter was a warning shot. He's giving you time to panic, to make a mistake." Mason looked at her directly. "Don't give him one." "I won't." "Good." He led the horse to the water trough. "Daniels is sending a deputy out here tomorrow, just to check on things, make sure we're all right. After that, he'll have someone ride past every few days. It's not much, but it's something." "It's more than I've ever had," Lila said quietly. Mason glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "You've got more than you think, Lila." The way he said her name, steady, certain, like it mattered, made her chest ache. "Thank you," she whispered. Mason nodded and turned his attention back to the horse, signaling the conversation was over. Lila walked back to the house, her mind churning. They had law, they had help, they had a plan. But Gideon had rage and desperation and 1,000 reasons to destroy everything she'd built here. The question wasn't if he would come, it was when. 2 days later, the first stranger appeared. Lila saw him from the kitchen window, a man on horseback, moving slow along the ridge, just visible against the sky. He didn't come closer, didn't approach the house, just sat there, watching. Mason saw him too. "Stay inside," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Keep the children away from the windows." He walked out to the porch, rifle in hand, and stood there in plain view. The stranger watched for another minute, then turned his horse and rode away. Mason didn't come back inside for an hour. When he did, his face was grim. "He's testing us, seeing how we react." "Do you think it was Gideon?" "No, Gideon doesn't scout. He sends people to do it for him." Mason set the rifle by the door. But it means he's close. That night, Lila couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house, the creak of boards, the whisper of wind through the eaves, the distant call of an owl. She thought of Gideon's hands around Noah's throat, the crack of his fist against her ribs, the cold, flat look in his eyes when he hurt people. She thought of Mason standing on the porch with a rifle, putting himself between her family and danger without hesitation. She thought of her children sleeping soundly for the first time in years. And she made a decision. If Gideon came for them, he wouldn't find her cowering. He'd find her ready. The next morning, she asked Mason to teach her how to shoot. He didn't ask why. He just nodded and took her out to the field behind the barn, where he set up a row of tin cans on fence posts. Ever fired a gun before? Once. A long time ago. Mason handed her the rifle. It's going to kick. Don't fight it. Let it happen. Lila raised the rifle, settled the stock against her shoulder, and sighted down the barrel the way he showed her. Breathe out slow, Mason said quietly. Squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. She did. The rifle cracked. The tin can flew off the post. Lila lowered the gun, her hands shaking, adrenaline singing through her veins. Mason's mouth curved. You're a natural. I'm terrified. Good. Means you'll be careful. He took the rifle, reloaded it, handed it back. Again. She fired, missed, fired again, hit. By the time the sun reached its peak, she'd hit more than she'd missed. Mason nodded, satisfied. You'll do. Lila looked at him, this quiet man who'd given her family sanctuary, who'd stood against her demons without flinching, who was teaching her to fight because he believed she could. Why are you doing this? She asked. Really? Mason was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. 5 years ago, I lost my wife, he said finally. Fever took her in 3 days. I couldn't stop it. Couldn't fix it. Couldn't save her. His voice roughened. I've been half alive ever since, going through the motions, keeping busy so I don't have to think too hard. Lila's breath caught. Then you showed up, Mason continued. You and those kids, running from something I couldn't see but could feel in every careful step you took. And I thought, he stopped, started again. I thought maybe this is why I'm still here. Maybe this is the thing I can fix. Mason, I'm not asking you to love me, Lila. I'm not asking for anything. He met her eyes. I'm just telling you that you're not alone anymore. And whatever comes, we face it together. Lila felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been locked tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Okay, she whispered. Mason nodded and turned to gather the tin cans, leaving her standing in the field with a rifle in her hands and tears streaming down her face. That evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, another stranger appeared. This time, there were 2 of them. They didn't ride the ridge. They rode straight up to the house. Mason met them on the porch, rifle ready. Lila stood in the doorway, heart hammering, the children hidden upstairs. The men stopped their horses 20 feet away. One of them, lean, hard-faced, with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, grinned. You Mason Hale. I am. Got a message for you. The man pulled a piece of paper from his jacket and tossed it. It landed in the dust at Mason's feet. From Gideon Carter. Says you got something that belongs to him. Mason didn't move. Tell Gideon Carter he's mistaken. The scarred man laughed. You sure about that? Because he seems real convinced. I'm sure. The second man, younger, nervous, shifted in his saddle. Look, mister, we're just delivering a message. No need for trouble. Then deliver it and ride out. The scarred man's grin widened. Message is simple. Gideon wants his wife and kids back. You hand them over. Nobody gets hurt. You don't? He shrugged. Well, accidents happen out here. Barns catch fire. Cattle stampede. Men fall off roofs. Mason's voice didn't change. Tell Gideon Carter that if he sets foot on my land, I'll put a bullet in him. And if he sends anyone else to threaten me or mine, I'll do the same to them. The scarred man's grin faded. You don't know who you're messing with. Neither do you. For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Then the younger man tugged at his reins. Come on. We delivered the message. The scarred man spat in the dust, his eyes cold. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," Mason said, "but not as much as Gideon will." The men turned their horses and rode away, dust rising in their wake. Mason stood on the porch until they disappeared from sight. Then he bent, picked up the paper, and brought it inside. Lila met him in the kitchen, her face pale. "What does it say?" Mason unfolded it, read it. His jaw tightened. "What does it say?" Lila repeated, her voice shaking. Mason looked at her. "It says he's coming. 3 days." Lila's knees went weak. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. 3 days. "We'll be ready," Mason said quietly. Lila looked at him, this man who'd become their shield, their sanctuary, their last line of defense, and nodded. "Yes," she said. "We will." The house felt different after the men left. Smaller somehow, despite its solid walls and sturdy beams. The air pressed close and heavy, thick with the weight of what was coming. Mason stood at the kitchen table with the note spread flat before him, his calloused fingers tracing the crude scrawl of Gideon's handwriting. Lila watched him from across the room, her back pressed against the counter, arms crossed tight over her chest like she could hold herself together through sheer force of will. "What do we do?" she asked finally. Mason looked up. His eyes were steady, clear, like he'd already worked through every possibility and settled on a path. "We get the children out of here. Tonight." "They won't go." "Then we don't give them a choice." He straightened, his voice firm but not unkind. "Lila, if Gideon comes here with the men he's got backing him, this place is going to turn into a war zone. I won't have your kids caught in the middle of that." "Where would they go?" "The boarding house. Mrs. Calloway, the widow you mentioned. Daniels vouched for her when I was in town, said she's taken in families before when things got rough." Mason crossed his arms. "I'll ride into town at first light, make the arrangements. You pack what they need." Lila's throat tightened. "Clara won't leave me." "Then you convince her. Because the alternative is her watching her mother get hurt, or worse." Mason's expression softened just slightly. "She's carried enough for a lifetime. Let her be a kid for a few days. Let someone else do the protecting." Lila closed her eyes, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. Clara had been her rock, her second set of hands, her partner in survival. But that burden had cost her daughter something precious, the right to simply be young. "All right," Lila whispered. "I'll talk to her." She found Clara upstairs in the room she shared with Noah, sitting on the edge of the bed with her hands folded in her lap. The evening light slanted through the window, turning her hair to gold. She looked up when Lila entered, and the question was already in her eyes. "They're coming, aren't they?" Lila sat down beside her daughter. "Yes." "When?" 3 days. Clara's shoulders tensed. "What did Mason say?" "He wants you and your brothers somewhere safe, away from here." Clara's head snapped around. "No." "Sweetheart." "No, Mama. I'm not leaving you." Clara's voice shook, but her jaw was set in that stubborn line Lila knew too well. "We stay together. That's how we've survived this long. And that's how we'll survive this too," Lila said gently, "but not by putting you in the line of fire. Clara, if something happens to me, I need to know you're safe. I need to know you'll take care of your brothers. Nothing's going to happen to you." "Maybe not. But if it does," Lila cupped her daughter's face, feeling the dampness of tears on her cheeks. "If it does, I need you somewhere you can keep going. Somewhere you can build a life. You understand?" Clara's face crumpled. "I don't want to leave you." "I know, baby. I know." Lila pulled her close, holding her tight, while her daughter shook with silent sobs. "But this is what I need from you. This is how you help me fight." Clara clung to her for a long moment, then pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Where are we going?" "A boarding house in town. A woman named Mrs. Calloway. Mason says she's kind." "And you'll come get us?" "After?" "The second it's safe, I promise." Clara nodded slowly, her young face solemn. "Okay. But Mama?" "Yes?" "You come back to us, you hear me? You don't let him win." Lila's throat closed. She nodded, unable to speak. That night, while the children slept upstairs, Mason and Lila sat on the porch in the cooling dark. The cicadas sang their relentless song. Stars scattered across the sky like salt spilled on black cloth. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "You ever fire a gun in anger?" Mason asked quietly. Lila looked at him. "No. It's different from target practice. Everything moves faster. Your hands shake. Your vision narrows. You forget to breathe." He paused. "You might freeze." "I won't freeze." "You might," Mason said. "And that's all right. I just need you to know, if it comes to shooting, you aim center mass. You don't hesitate. You don't warn them. You just shoot." Lila's stomach turned, but she nodded. "I understand. I mean it, Lila. These men, they're not going to give you a second chance. They're not going to fight fair. If you pull that trigger, you do it to stop them. Nothing else." "I know." Mason studied her face in the dim light. "You sure you want to do this? There's no shame in running. I could get you all out tonight, put you on a train headed west. You'd be gone before Gideon even got here." For a moment, Lila let herself imagine it. A train car rocking gently through the night. Her children safe beside her. Miles stretching between them and this place, this danger, this man who'd haunted her for so long. But she'd already run once. Already uprooted her children, already spent weeks looking over her shoulder, already taught them that safety was something you borrowed, never something you owned. "I'm sure," she said. Mason nodded. "Then we do this right." He stood and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the dark fields. "Daniels is sending 2 deputies out here tomorrow. They'll camp on the property, keep watch. That gives us 3 pairs of eyes instead of 1. You trust them?" "I trust Daniels, and he wouldn't send anyone he didn't trust." Mason turned back to her. "We'll fortify the house, board up the lower windows, clear sight lines, make sure we've got water and supplies if we have to hold out." "You think it'll come to that?" "I think Gideon wants you scared enough to make mistakes. But when you don't run, when you don't hand yourself over, yeah, I think he'll come with everything he's got." Lila's hands tightened on the porch rail. "What if we can't hold them?" "We will." "But if we can't—" Mason crossed to her, his boots heavy on the wood. He stopped close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him, smell the leather and dust and honest sweat. "Then we make sure they pay for every inch of ground. We make sure they remember this place. And we make damn sure they don't get to you." The certainty in his voice steadied her. She looked up at him, this quiet man who'd become their fortress, and felt something shift in her chest, something deeper than gratitude, warmer than relief. "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk everything for us?" Mason's gaze held hers. "Because I've spent 5 years wishing I could have saved someone I loved. And maybe I can't go back and fix that. But I can stand here now and make sure history doesn't repeat itself." Lila's breath caught. "Mason, you don't have to say anything." His voice was rough. "I just need you to know, whatever happens in 3 days, you're not alone in this. You never were." She wanted to tell him what that meant, wanted to find words big enough to hold the gratitude, the fear, the fragile hope blooming in her chest despite everything, but the words wouldn't come. So instead she reached out and took his hand. He looked down at their joined fingers, weathered and work-worn, fitting together like they'd been doing it for years. Then he squeezed gently and let go. "Get some sleep," he said quietly. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He walked back inside, leaving her alone on the porch with the night pressing close and her heart beating too fast. Mason left for town before dawn, the sky still gray and uncertain. Lila watched him ride out, then turned her attention to the work at hand. She woke the children and fed them breakfast, eggs and toast and bacon, strong coffee for herself, then sat them down at the table. "You're leaving today," she said without preamble. "All 3 of you. Mason's arranged for you to stay with a woman in town until this is over." Eli's fork clattered to his plate. "No, it's not up for discussion. I'm not leaving you." Eli's voice cracked, hovering between boy and man. "I can help. I can fight. You can help by keeping your sister and brother safe." Lila kept her voice firm. "That's what I need from you, Eli. Can you do that?" The boy's jaw worked. His eyes shone with frustration and fear and something that looked like shame. "I should be here. You should be where I don't have to worry about you getting hurt." Noah, who'd been silent until now, looked up with wide, frightened eyes. Is Papa coming? The word Papa landed like a stone in still water. Lila's stomach twisted. She knelt beside Noah's chair, bringing herself to his level. Yes, baby, but he's not going to get anywhere near you, I promise. I don't want to go. I know. She smoothed his hair back from his forehead, her thumb tracing the faded bruise at his temple. But sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let someone else fight for us. You understand? Noah's lower lip trembled. He nodded. Clara, who'd been staring at her plate, finally spoke. How long? A few days? Maybe less? And then you'll come for us? The second it's safe. Clara looked at her brothers, then back at her mother. We'll be ready. They packed quickly, 2 small trunks filled with clothes, a few books, Noah's wooden horse, Clara's sewing kit. Lila worked with practiced efficiency, folding and tucking, her hands steady even as her heart hammered. Mason returned mid-morning with 2 deputies in tow. One was older, gray-bearded, with eyes that had seen their share of trouble. The other was younger, but carried himself with the kind of quiet competence that spoke of military service. Mrs. Carter, the older deputy said, touching his hat. Name's Walker. This here's Deputy Brooks. Sheriff Daniels sent us to keep an eye on things. Lila nodded. Thank you. Walker's gaze moved to the children standing on the porch, their small trunks at their feet. His expression softened. We'll make sure your mama's safe, kids. You have my word. Eli studied him with suspicious eyes. Brooks just nodded, understanding the boy's distrust without needing explanation. Mason loaded the trunks into the wagon. Lila gathered the children close, memorizing the feel of them, Clara's thin shoulders, Eli's rigid spine, Noah's small hand clutching her skirt. I love you, she whispered. All of you. Don't forget that. We won't, Clara said, her voice steady even as tears streaked her cheeks. Eli didn't speak. He just wrapped his arms around her and held on tight. Noah buried his face in her neck. Come back, Mama. I will, baby, I promise. She had to physically pry Noah's arms from around her neck, had to step back before her resolve crumbled completely. Mason helped the children into the wagon, his movements gentle, and took the reins. I'll be back before dark, he told Lila. She nodded, not trusting her voice. The wagon rolled away, dust rising in its wake. Lila stood in the yard and watched until it disappeared over the ridge, taking her heart with it. When she finally turned back to the house, Walker and Brooks were already at work, checking sight lines, testing window latches, mapping the property. They moved with the efficiency of men who'd done this before, who knew how to turn a home into a fortress. Lila went inside and started cooking. It was the only thing that made sense, the only way to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling. She made enough stew to feed an army, baked bread until the kitchen was thick with the smell of yeast and warmth, churned butter, snapped green beans. By the time Mason returned, the sun was sinking low, and the house smelled like sanctuary. He found her at the stove, stirring a pot with mechanical precision. They're safe, he said quietly. Mrs. Calloway's got them settled. Claire's already helping in the kitchen. Eli's chopping wood. Noah's being 6. Lila's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you. Mason nodded and went to join the deputies outside. That night, they ate together, Lila, Mason, Walker, and Brooks, crowded around the kitchen table like soldiers before battle. The food was good, but nobody tasted it. They were all too focused on what was coming. Gideon Carter, Walker said, pushing his plate aside. I know that name. Worked the claims up near Silverton for a while. Got a reputation for being mean when he drinks. He's mean when he's sober, too, Lila said quietly. Walker nodded. Sheriff Daniels filled us in. Says you got documentation, proof he's dangerous. Lila pulled Jacob's letter from her apron and handed it over. Walker read it, his expression darkening, then passed it to Brooks. This helps, Walker said, but it's not going to stop him from coming. I know. You understand what you're asking us to do here, Mrs. Carter. If shooting starts, we're authorized to defend this property, but Gideon's going to claim he's got legal right to take you and those kids. That warrant he's carrying, fake or not, gives him cover. Then we prove it's fake. In a court of law, sure. But out here? Walker shook his head. Out here, it comes down to who's standing when the dust settles. Mason's jaw tightened. Then we make sure it's us. Brooks spoke for the first time, his voice low and steady. How many men you think he's bringing? Hard to say, Mason replied. But at least 4, maybe more. 4 against 4 then, even odds. Except they're coming to us, Walker pointed out. We know the ground, we've got cover. That counts for something. They talked strategy until the candles burned low, fields of fire, fallback positions, signals, and contingencies. Lila listened, her stomach churning, trying to memorize details that might keep them alive. When the deputies finally headed outside to set up watch, Mason walked Lila to the stairs. Get some rest, he said. I won't be able to sleep. Try anyway. You'll need your strength. She nodded and climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. Her room felt too quiet without Clara's soft breathing, without Noah's occasional sleepy murmur. She lay down fully clothed on top of the quilt and stared at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come. Instead, memories did. Gideon's fist connecting with her ribs, the sound of Noah crying, Clara's small voice saying, It's okay, Mama, when nothing was okay. Eli standing between her and his father, barely 10 years old, fists clenched and shaking. The weight of it pressed down on her chest until she couldn't breathe. She got up and went to the window, looking out at the dark fields. Walker was visible near the barn, his silhouette outlined by moonlight. Brooks was somewhere out by the fence line. Mason was on the porch, rifle across his knees, keeping watch. Always keeping watch. Lila pressed her forehead to the cool glass and let herself cry, quietly, so no one would hear, releasing the fear she'd been holding tight for so long. When she was empty, she wiped her face and went back to bed. This time, exhaustion dragged her under. The next day passed in tense preparation. Mason and the deputies reinforced the lower windows with boards, stacking furniture for additional cover. They filled barrels with water in case of fire, moved ammunition to strategic locations, cleared the yard of anything that could provide cover for approaching men. Lila cooked and cleaned, her hands never still. She baked more bread, made more stew, washed clothes that didn't need washing, anything to keep moving, to avoid thinking about what tomorrow might bring. That evening, a rider appeared on the ridge. Walker spotted him first. We got company. They all moved to defensive positions. Mason on the porch, the deputies flanking the house, Lila inside with a rifle she prayed she wouldn't have to use. The rider came closer, hands raised, moving slow and deliberate. As he neared, Lila's breath caught. She knew that face. Hold your fire, she called out, stepping onto the porch. I know him. Mason didn't lower his rifle. Who is he? Jacob Carter, Gideon's brother. Mason's expression hardened. The one who wrote the letter? Yes. Jacob stopped his horse 30 feet out. He looked older than Lila remembered, thinner, worn down by guilt and something that might have been shame. Lila, he called out, I need to talk to you. Talk from there, Mason said flatly. Jacob's eyes shifted to Mason, assessing. You the one who took her in? I am. Then you should know. Gideon's not coming in 3 days. He's coming tomorrow, at dawn. Lila's heart stopped. Why? Mason demanded. Why tell us? Jacob's face twisted. Because I'm tired of standing by while my brother destroys people. Because I let it happen for too long. He looked at Lila. Because you deserved better, and I didn't give it to you. How many men? Walker called out. 6, maybe 7. He's got Quinn and his boys from Silverton. Mean bastards, all of them. They're camped 5 miles north, waiting for first light. Brooks swore under his breath. Mason's grip on his rifle tightened. Why should we believe you? Because I'm here instead of with them, Jacob shot back. Because I gave Lila that letter hoping she'd use it. Because I'm done being my brother's keeper. Lila stepped forward. What does he want, Jacob? Jacob's eyes met hers, and she saw the truth there, brutal and inescapable. He wants to make an example of you, wants everyone to see what happens when someone defies him. Jacob's voice cracked. Lila, he's not coming to take you back. He's coming to punish you. The words hung in the air like smoke. Mason's voice was cold as stone. Then let him come. Jacob shook his head. You don't understand. Quinn and his boys, they're not just hired muscle, they're killers. This won't be a fair fight. Good, Mason said. Neither will we. Jacob looked at him for a long moment, then back at Lila. I'm sorry. For everything. Will you testify? Lila asked suddenly. If we survive this, will you stand up in court and tell the truth about what Gideon is? Jacob hesitated. Then he nodded. Yes. Then go to Sheriff Daniels. Tell him what you told us. Make sure there's a record. Jacob gathered his reins. I will. And Lila, for what it's worth, I hope you make it through this. You and those kids deserve a life without him in it. He turned his horse and rode back into the gathering dark. Mason waited until he was out of sight, then turned to the deputies. You heard him. They're coming at dawn. That gives us... He checked the sky. Maybe 8 hours. We need more men, Brooks said. No time, Walker replied. We work with what we've got. Mason looked at Lila. Get inside. Stay away from the windows. If shooting starts, you get down and you stay down. I can shoot. I know you can, but I need you alive more than I need another gun. Lila wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could fight alongside them, but she saw the look in Mason's eyes, the same look he'd had when he talked about losing his wife, about not being able to save her, and she understood. This wasn't about her ability to shoot. This was about him needing to know she'd survive. All right, she said softly. Mason nodded, relief flickering across his face. Then he turned back to the deputies. Let's make this count. They worked through the night, moved furniture into barricades, positioned water buckets for firefighting, loaded rifles and checked ammunition, mapped out firing positions and retreat routes. Lila made coffee strong enough to strip paint and sandwiches no one ate. She moved through the house like a ghost, touching familiar things. The kitchen table where her children had laughed. The stove where she'd cooked her first meal in freedom. The window where she'd watched Mason work the fields. This place had given them everything. And at dawn, they were going to fight to keep it. As the sky began to lighten in the east, gray bleeding into pale gold, Mason came inside one last time. Sun's coming up, he said quietly. Lila nodded. She'd positioned herself in the kitchen, away from windows but with clear sight lines to both doors. Her rifle leaned against the wall within easy reach. Mason crossed to her. For a moment he just stood there, looking at her like he was memorizing her face. Mason, when this is over, he interrupted, I'm taking you to get those kids, and we're bringing them home. All of you. You hear me? Lila's eyes burned. I hear you. Good. He reached out and squeezed her shoulder. Brief, solid, real. Then he walked back outside. The sun climbed higher, and in the distance dust rose on the horizon. 7 riders, moving fast. Here they come, Walker called out. Mason raised his rifle. Lila pressed her back against the wall and started to pray. The riders slowed as they approached, spreading out in a loose line across the dusty yard. Lila could see them through the narrow gap in the boarded window, 7 men on horseback, silhouetted against the rising sun. She recognized Gideon immediately, even from a distance. The way he sat his horse, shoulders back, chin high, like he owned the world and everything in it. Her hands tightened on the rifle. Mason stood on the porch, feet planted wide, rifle held easy but ready. Walker was positioned at the corner of the house, using the wall for cover. Brooks had taken up position near the barn, his rifle resting on a fence rail. 3 against 7. The odds weren't good, but they'd faced worse. Gideon reined his horse to a stop 20 yards out. He was bigger than Lila remembered, or maybe she'd just gotten smaller in her mind over the years, shrinking him down to something manageable. But there was nothing manageable about the man sitting that horse. He was broad-shouldered and thick-armed, with a face that might have been handsome once before rage and liquor carved it into something cruel. Lila! His voice boomed across the yard, familiar and terrible. I know you're in there. Mason didn't move, didn't speak. Gideon's eyes shifted to him, assessing. You must be Hale, the fool who thought he could hide another man's wife. She's not your wife anymore, Mason said, his voice carrying clear and steady. She left. That makes her a free woman. Gideon laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. That's not how marriage works, friend. What's mine stays mine until I say different. Law says different. Law says I got a warrant for her arrest, says she kidnapped my children, says I got every right to take her back. Gideon pulled a folded paper from his coat and waved it in the air. You want to argue with the law? That warrant's not worth the paper it's printed on, Walker called out. It's from a county that's got no jurisdiction here. You know it, and I know it. Gideon's smile didn't waver. Maybe so, but it looks official enough. And when folks hear about a woman who stole a man's kids and ran off, well, they tend to side with the husband. Not when the husband's a woman beater, Brooks said flatly. The smile finally slipped. Gideon's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. I know what I see, Mason said. Saw the bruises on that little boy's face. Saw the way those kids flinched every time someone moved too fast. That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of man you are. Gideon's face darkened. The men flanking him shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward their guns. Last chance, Hale, Gideon said, his voice dropping low and dangerous. Send her out. Send the kids out. And we ride away peaceful. Can't do that? Can't or won't? Both. Gideon stared at him for a long moment. Then he shrugged. Your funeral. He raised his hand. Wait! The shout came from behind the line of riders. A horse burst through, the rider pulling up hard beside Gideon. It was Jacob, his face pale and determined. Gideon, don't do this. Gideon's head whipped around. What the hell are you doing here? Stopping you from making the worst mistake of your life. This doesn't concern you, little brother. Like hell it doesn't. Jacob's voice shook, but he didn't back down. I've stood by and watched you hurt people for years. Watched you beat Lila. Watched you terrorize those kids. I told myself it wasn't my business, that you'd get better, that... His voice cracked. But you didn't get better, you got worse. And I'm done pretending I don't see it. One of the hired men, the scarred one who'd delivered Gideon's message days ago, spat in the dust. This is touching and all, but we didn't ride out here for a family reunion. Shut up, Quinn, Jacob snapped. Then to Gideon, there are witnesses now, people who know what you did. Sheriff Daniels has my testimony. He's got documentation. You do this, you ride in here and start shooting, and you're not just a husband reclaiming his family. You're a criminal. I'm already a criminal according to them, Gideon said, gesturing toward Mason. So what's a little more blood? Everything, Jacob said desperately. It's everything. Because right now you might still walk away from this. You might still have a chance at some kind of life. But you cross this line, you hurt these people, there's no coming back. For a moment, something flickered in Gideon's eyes, something that might have been doubt. Then it was gone. Get out of my way, Jacob. No. Gideon's hand moved to his gun. I said move. Jacob's horse sidestepped nervously, but Jacob held his ground. If you want to get to them, you go through me. The yard went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Gideon smiled, cold and empty. All right. He drew his gun and shot his brother. The crack of the gunshot shattered the morning. Jacob jerked backward in his saddle, a red bloom spreading across his chest. His horse reared. He slid sideways, hitting the ground with a sickening thud. No! Lila's scream tore from her throat before she could stop it. Everything exploded. Quinn and his men drew their weapons. Mason's rifle barked. One of the riders toppled from his horse, clutching his shoulder. Walker fired. Brooks fired. The air filled with the deafening roar of gunfire and the acrid smell of powder smoke. Gideon spurred his horse forward, charging straight toward the house. Mason fired again, but Gideon ducked low over his horse's neck. The bullet whistled past his head. He reached the porch and launched himself from the saddle, hitting Mason with the full force of his weight. They went down hard, crashing through the porch railing. Mason's rifle skittered away across the boards. Gideon's fist connected with his jaw, snapping his head back. Mason drove his elbow into Gideon's ribs, heard the satisfying crack of bone. Gideon roared and slammed Mason's head against the porch. Stars exploded across Mason's vision. He bucked, throwing Gideon off, and scrambled to his feet. They circled each other like wolves, both breathing hard, both bleeding. You should have given her back, Gideon panted. Should have minded your own business. She's not property, Mason spat blood. And she's not yours. Gideon charged. Inside the house, Lila pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Gunfire rattled outside, short, sharp bursts punctuated by shouts and the scream of horses. Through the gap in the boards, she could see Walker and Brooks trading shots with Quinn's men, using the barn and fence for cover. One of the hired men broke from the group and ran toward the house. Lila raised her rifle, hands shaking so badly she could barely sight down the barrel. The man kicked in the door. Time slowed. Lila saw his face, young, maybe 25, with wild eyes and a gun in his hand. Saw him raise the gun toward her, saw his finger tighten on the trigger. She fired. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The man stumbled backward, shock registering on his face. He looked down at the spreading red on his chest, then up at her. "You shot me," he said, sounding almost surprised. Then he collapsed. Lila stood frozen, the rifle still raised, staring at what she'd done. Her ears rang. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd killed a man. She'd actually... Another figure filled the doorway. Lila spun, finger on the trigger, ready to fire again. "Don't shoot!" Brooks threw his hands up. "It's me!" Lila lowered the rifle, her legs suddenly weak. Brooks stepped over the dead man and moved to the window, peering out through the boards. "You all right?" he asked, not looking at her. Her voice came out strangled. "I shot him." "You did what you had to do." Brooks fired through the gap, his rifle cracking. "Now reload. We're not done yet." Lila's hands moved on instinct, muscle memory taking over where her mind had gone blank. She reloaded, raised the rifle, waited. Outside, the gunfight raged on. Walker had taken down another of Quinn's men, but he'd taken a bullet to the leg and was bleeding badly. He'd dragged himself behind a water trough and was still firing, his face pale and set. Quinn himself had dismounted and was using his dead horse for cover, his rifle spitting fire and lead with ruthless precision. One of his shots shattered the barn window inches from Brooks's head, and on the porch, Mason and Gideon were still fighting. They crashed through the front door into the kitchen, a tangle of fists and rage. Gideon grabbed a cast-iron skillet from the stove and swung it at Mason's head. Mason ducked, felt the wind of its passing, and drove his fist into Gideon's kidney. Gideon grunted and swung the skillet again. This time it connected, catching Mason across the temple. He went down hard, vision swimming, blood running hot down the side of his face. Gideon stood over him, breathing hard, the skillet raised for another blow. "You should have stayed out of this," he panted. "Should have let me have what's mine." Mason's hand found the leg of the overturned table. He swung it up and around, catching Gideon across the knees. Gideon's legs buckled. He fell, and Mason was on him, driving his fist into Gideon's face again and again and again. Gideon's nose broke with a wet crack, blood sprayed, but he was bigger, stronger, meaner. He got his hands around Mason's throat and squeezed. Mason couldn't breathe. The world started to gray at the edges. He clawed at Gideon's hands, his lungs screaming. Then Lila was there. She pressed the barrel of her rifle against Gideon's temple. "Let him go," she said, her voice steady as stone. Gideon's eyes rolled sideways, meeting hers. "You won't shoot me." "I just killed one of your men. You want to test me?" For a heartbeat, Gideon didn't move. Then, slowly, he released Mason's throat. Mason rolled away, gasping, clutching his neck. Lila kept the rifle trained on Gideon. "Get up! Slow!" Gideon rose to his feet, hands raised, that cold smile still playing at his lips. "There she is. There's the woman I married. Finally found your spine, did you?" "Shut up." "You think this is over? You think you've won?" Gideon laughed. "Even if you kill me, even if you walk away from this, you'll never be free, because you'll always be looking over your shoulder, always waiting for the next man who thinks he can own you." "Maybe," Lila said, "but it won't be you." Gideon's smile widened. "You sure about that?" His hand flashed to a knife at his belt. Lila fired. The bullet caught him high in the shoulder, spinning him around. He hit the wall and slid down, leaving a red smear on the whitewash. The knife clattered to the floor. He pressed his hand to the wound, blood welling between his fingers, and laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You did it," he wheezed. "You actually did it." Lila lowered the rifle. Her hands were shaking again, but her voice stayed steady. "It's over, Gideon." "No." He struggled to his feet, using the wall for support. "It's not over until I say it's—" The gunshot came from the doorway. Gideon jerked, his eyes going wide. He looked down at the new hole in his chest, then up at the figure standing in the doorway. Sheriff Daniels lowered his rifle. Now it's over. Behind him, 3 more deputies poured into the yard, weapons drawn. The remaining hired men, Quinn and 2 others, threw down their guns and raised their hands. It was over. The silence that followed was deafening. Lila stood in the ruined kitchen, surrounded by broken furniture and blood and the acrid smell of gunpowder, and felt her knees give out. She sat down hard on the floor, the rifle falling from her hands. Mason crawled to her side, his face bruised and bleeding, and pulled her against his chest. She buried her face in his shirt and shook. "You're all right," he murmured, his voice rough. "You're all right." Outside, Daniels was shouting orders. His deputies rounded up the surviving hired men, binding their hands. One of them knelt beside Jacob, checking for a pulse. "He's alive!" the deputy called out. "Barely, but he's breathing." Lila's head snapped up. "Jacob, we'll get him to a doctor," Daniels said, stepping into the kitchen. His eyes swept the scene, the dead man by the door, Gideon slumped against the wall, the 2 people clinging to each other on the floor. "Christ, what a mess." "They came for her," Mason said hoarsely. "We defended ourselves." "I know. Jacob told me everything before he rode out here." Daniels crouched beside Gideon, checking for a pulse. His expression tightened. "He's gone." Lila felt nothing. No relief, no grief. Just a vast, hollow emptiness where fear had lived for so long. Daniels stood. "Mrs. Carter, I'm going to need your statement, and we'll need to sort through what happened here. But I want you to know you did nothing wrong. You defended your home, your life. There's not a judge in the territory who'll say different." Lila nodded, unable to speak. Daniels turned to Mason. "You need a doctor?" "I'll live." "Good, because Walker's in bad shape. We need to get him to town." Daniels paused. "And those kids of yours, Mrs. Carter, they're safe. Mrs. Calloway's got them. They don't know what happened here yet." "Thank you," Lila whispered. Daniels nodded and headed back outside, already shouting instructions. The deputies worked quickly, loading the wounded onto wagons, binding the prisoners, covering the dead. Within an hour, the yard was emptied of everyone except Mason, Lila, and a single deputy left to stand guard. They sat together on the porch steps, the same steps where Lila had shelled peas, where Mason had promised she wasn't alone, where her children had laughed in the evening light. The sun climbed higher, turning the blood in the dust to rust. "I killed him," Lila said quietly. "No," Mason said. "Daniels did. But I shot him first." "You defended yourself. There's a difference." Lila looked at her hands. They'd stopped shaking, but they felt foreign somehow, like they belonged to someone else. "I thought I'd feel different, relieved maybe, or vindicated, but I just feel—" She trailed off. "Empty?" She nodded. Mason took her hand, folding it carefully between both of his. "That'll pass. Give it time." "How do you know?" "Because I felt the same way when my wife died. Like someone had scooped out my insides and left nothing but air." He squeezed her hand gently. "But it passes, slowly, and one day you wake up and realize you can breathe again." Lila leaned her head against his shoulder. He smelled like sweat and blood and gunpowder, and she'd never been more grateful for another human being in her life. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." "Thank me by sticking around," Mason said. "This place needs you. I need you." She lifted her head, meeting his eyes. They were bloodshot and bruised, but steady, always steady. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Mason smiled, small and tired and real. "Good." They sat together as the sun climbed higher and the deputy kept watch, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out against the endless blue. That evening, after giving their statements to Sheriff Daniels and watching the wagons roll away with the prisoners and the dead, Mason and Lila rode into town together to collect the children. Mrs. Calloway met them at the door of the boarding house, her round face creased with concern. "They've been asking for you all day. Heard there was trouble out at the ranch." "It's over," Lila said. "Is it all right if we take them home?" "Of course, dear, of course," Mrs. Calloway stepped aside. "They're upstairs, second room on the left." Lila climbed the stairs on legs that felt like lead. Every muscle ached. Her hands were raw. Her heart felt too big for her chest. She pushed open the door. 3 heads turned toward her. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Noah launched himself across the room and into her arms, nearly knocking her over. Clara was right behind him, wrapping her arms around both of them. Eli hung back for a heartbeat longer, his young face carefully controlled, before he too stepped forward and let himself be pulled into the embrace. They stood there in the small boarding house room, tangled together, and Lila felt something shift inside her, something that had been broken for so long she'd forgotten it could be whole. "Is it over?" Clara whispered against her mother's shoulder. "Yes, baby. It's over." "He's gone?" "He's gone." Clara's shoulders shook. Eli pressed his face into Lila's side. Noah clung to her like he'd never let go. Mason appeared in the doorway, his battered face soft with something that looked like wonder. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's go home." They rode back to Ridge Hollow as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber and rose. The children rode in the wagon bed, quiet and close, while Lila sat beside Mason on the bench. When the ranch came into view, solid and steady against the darkening sky, Lila felt her throat tighten. Home. She'd never had one before. Not really. Just places she'd survived in, places she'd escaped from. But this was different. Mason pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. The deputy who'd been standing guard tipped his hat and rode off, his duty done. The children climbed down from the wagon and stood in the yard, staring at the house like they were seeing it for the first time. "Is it safe now?" Eli asked, his voice small. Mason crouched down to the boy's level. "It's safe, I promise." "How do you know?" "Because I'll make sure it stays that way. Because your mama's the strongest woman I've ever met. And because this is your home now. Nobody's taking that away." Eli studied his face for a long moment. Then he nodded. They went inside together. Lila lit the lamps and started supper, something simple, something comforting. Fried chicken and mashed potatoes and green beans. The kitchen filled with familiar smells, chasing away the ghosts of gunpowder and blood. The children set the table without being asked. Noah chattered about the chicken coop at Mrs. Calloway's boarding house. Clara sliced bread with steady hands. Eli poured water into glasses, moving with the careful precision of someone trying very hard to be useful. They ate together, the 5 of them crowded around the table, and for the first time in longer than Lila could remember, there was no fear, no waiting for the next blow, no bracing for rage, just the quiet comfort of people who'd survived something terrible and come out the other side together. After supper, Mason sent the children upstairs to wash up and get ready for bed. When they were gone, he turned to Lila. "You all right?" She thought about the question, about the weight of it, about everything that had happened, the terror, the violence, the death. "I will be," she said. Mason nodded. "That's enough for now." He started clearing the table, stacking plates with careful hands. Lila watched him, this quiet man who'd stood between her family and destruction without hesitation, who'd fought for them like they were his own. "Mason?" He looked up. "Why did you really do it? Why risk everything?" He set down the plates, crossed to where she stood, looked at her with those steady, serious eyes. "Because when you showed up here with those kids, broken and afraid and still fighting, I saw what I'd lost when my wife died. I saw what it meant to actually live instead of just survive." His voice roughened. "You reminded me what I was fighting for, what it means to protect something that matters." Lila's eyes burned. "We matter to you? More than you know." She reached up and touched his bruised face, her fingers gentle against the swelling. "You matter to us too." Mason caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. For a moment, they just stood there in the lamplight, battered and exhausted and alive. Then the sound of footsteps on the stairs broke the spell. Noah appeared in the doorway, dressed in his nightshirt, his hair damp from washing. "Mama, will you tuck me in?" Lila smiled. "Of course, baby." She followed him upstairs, Mason trailing behind. The children were already in their beds, Clara and Noah in one room, Eli across the hall. Lila moved between them, smoothing quilts, kissing foreheads, murmuring the kind of gentle nothings that had been impossible before. When she reached Eli's room, she found him still sitting up, staring out the window at the darkening sky. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. He shook his head. Lila sat on the edge of his bed. What's wrong? Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then, is he really gone? Papa? The word Papa still hurt, but Lila understood. Gideon had been his father, even if he'd been a terrible one. Yes, she said gently. He's really gone. Did you kill him? Lila's throat tightened. Sheriff Daniels did, but I would have, if I'd had to protect you, to protect all of us. Eli looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. Does that make you sad? It makes me sad that it had to happen, but it doesn't make me sad that he's gone. She cupped his face. You understand the difference? Eli nodded slowly. I think so. He was your father. It's all right to feel however you feel about him, sad or angry or relieved or all of those things at once. Lila paused. But what he did, the way he hurt people, that wasn't your fault. And it doesn't have to define who you become. What if I turn out like him? The question broke her heart. You won't, she said firmly, because you already have something he never did. What? A good heart. And people who love you enough to help you protect it. Eli's eyes filled with tears. He scrubbed at them angrily, but Lila caught his hands. It's all right to cry, she said. It's all right to feel this. He collapsed against her, his thin shoulders shaking. Lila held him while he wept, for the father he'd never really had, for the fear he'd carried, for the relief of finally being safe. When the tears finally stopped, Eli pulled back and wiped his face. Mason's a good man, he said quietly. Yes, he is. Do you think... Eli hesitated. Do you think he'll let us stay? I think he's counting on it. Eli nodded and lay back down. Lila pulled the quilt up to his chin and kissed his forehead. Sleep now. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. She found Mason waiting at the bottom of the stairs, his expression unreadable. They're settled, she said. Good. He gestured toward the porch. Walk with me. They stepped outside into the cool night air. The stars were out in force, scattered like diamonds across black velvet. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. The night breeze carried the smell of dust and sage and possibility. Mason led her to the porch railing and stood beside her, both of them looking out at the darkened fields. What happens now? Lila asked quietly. Now you rebuild, Mason said. You and those kids. You make a life here. A real one. And you? Mason turned to face her. I'd like to be part of that life. If you'll have me. Lila's breath caught. Mason, I'm not asking for an answer tonight, he interrupted gently. I'm just saying, when you're ready, whenever that is, I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him, this steady, patient man who'd given her everything and asked for nothing, and felt something warm bloom in her chest. It wasn't love, not yet. It was too soon for that, too fragile. But it was the beginning of something, the possibility of something, and after everything they'd survived, possibility felt like grace. Thank you, she whispered. Mason smiled and turned back to the fields. They stood together in the darkness, two people who'd found each other in the worst of circumstances and chosen to stand together anyway, and watched the night settle over Ridge Hollow Ranch like a blessing. Tomorrow, there would be questions. Statements. A trial for the men who'd ridden with Gideon. Paperwork and legalities and the slow process of healing. But tonight, there was just this. Just peace. Just home. And for Lila Carter, who'd spent so long running from her demons, that was more than enough. The trial began 2 weeks later in the county courthouse, a squat brick building that sat at the edge of town like a monument to justice or judgment, depending on which side of the law you stood. Lila walked up the steps with Mason at her side, her children close behind, and felt the weight of every eye that turned toward her. The town knew what had happened at Ridge Hollow Ranch. Word had spread fast, the way it always did in small places where everyone knew everyone else's business. Some folks looked at her with sympathy, others with curiosity, a few with the kind of cold judgment that said they'd already made up their minds about a woman who'd left her husband and gotten him killed. Lila lifted her chin and walked inside. The courtroom was packed. Quinn and his two surviving men sat at the defendant's table, their hands shackled, their faces hard. Sheriff Daniels stood near the judge's bench, his deputy beside him. And in the front row, pale but alive, sat Jacob Carter. He'd survived the gunshot. The doctor said it was a miracle. The bullet had missed his heart by inches, passed clean through, left him weak but breathing. He'd spent 10 days in bed recovering, and now here he was, ready to testify against the men who'd ridden with his brother, ready to finally do the right thing. Lila caught his eye as she took her seat. He nodded, just once, and she saw the shame there, the regret. But she also saw determination. The judge entered, a stern-faced man named Whitmore with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He banged his gavel, and the room fell silent. "The territory versus Quinn, Dockery, and Mills," he announced. "Charges include conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and unlawful trespass with intent to harm. How do the defendants plead?" Quinn's lawyer, a thin man with nervous hands, stood. "Not guilty, Your Honor. My clients were operating under what they believe to be lawful warrant for the arrest of Lila Carter." "A warrant that's been proven fraudulent," Daniel said sharply. "That's for this court to determine," the lawyer replied. Judge Whitmore leaned back in his chair. "Then let's determine it. Prosecution, call your first witness." The prosecuting attorney, a capable woman named Margaret Ross who'd traveled from the territorial capital, stood. "The prosecution calls Jacob Carter." Jacob walked to the witness stand with the careful movements of a man still healing. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Ross approached him with measured steps. "Mr. Carter, you are the brother of Gideon Carter, deceased?" "I am." "And you were present on the day of the incident at Ridge Hollow Ranch?" "I was." "Tell the court what you saw." Jacob took a breath. Then he told them everything. About Gideon's rage, about the years of abuse Lila had suffered, about the fake warrant, the hired men, the plan to make an example of her, about his own attempts to stop it and his brother's bullet for his trouble. "Gideon told me he was going to make her pay," Jacob said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Said he'd burn that ranch to the ground if he had to. Said no woman walks away from him and lives to tell about it." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Quinn's lawyer stood. "Objection. This is hearsay." "It's a dying declaration from the deceased's own brother," Ross countered, "and Mr. Carter here is very much alive to testify to his brother's intentions." Judge Whitmore nodded. "Overruled. Continue, Mr. Carter." Jacob looked at Lila. "I should have stopped him years ago. Should have stood up to him the first time he raised his hand to her. But I was a coward. I told myself it wasn't my business, that families worked things out." His voice cracked. "I was wrong. And I'm sorry." "Your remorse is noted," Ross said gently. "But what we need from you now is the truth. Did Gideon Carter intend to harm Mrs. Carter and her children?" "Yes." "Did he hire these men?" She gestured to Quinn and the others. "To help him do it?" "Yes. And when you tried to stop him, what did he do?" Jacob's hand moved to his chest, to the bandages beneath his shirt. "He shot me." The courtroom erupted. Judge Whitmore banged his gavel. "Order! I will have order." Ross waited for the noise to settle. "No further questions, Your Honor." Quinn's lawyer approached Jacob with the wariness of a man crossing thin ice. "Mr. Carter, isn't it true that you have your own reasons for wanting to discredit your brother? That you were in love with Mrs. Carter yourself?" Jacob's eyes went flat. "No, that's a lie." "Is it? You wrote her a letter encouraging her to leave. You helped her escape. Seems like more than brotherly concern to me." "I wrote that letter because I was ashamed," Jacob said, his voice hard. "Because I watched my brother beat a woman half his size and did nothing. Because I heard her children crying at night and closed my ears. I helped her because it was the decent thing to do, something I should have done years ago." The lawyer shifted tactics. "But you can't deny you have bias against the defendants. Your own brother shot you." "Because I stood between him and an innocent family," Jacob shot back. "And yes, I'm biased. I'm biased toward this truth, toward justice, toward making sure what happened to Lila and her kids never happens to anyone else." The lawyer retreated. No further questions. Ross called Lila next. She walked to the stand on legs that threatened to buckle. swore her oath, sat down and folded her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. Ross's voice was kind. "Mrs. Carter, how long were you married to Gideon Carter?" 14 years. "And during that time, did he ever strike you?" Lila's throat tightened. "Yes." "How often?" "Often enough that I stopped counting." "Did he strike your children?" "Yes." The word came out barely above a whisper. "Can you tell the court what happened to your son Noah?" Lila looked at Noah sitting in the front row between Clara and Eli. His small face was solemn, his hand tucked in his sister's. The bruise was long healed, but the memory remained. "Gideon came home drunk," Lila said quietly. Noah had broken a plate by accident. Gideon grabbed him by the throat and slammed his head against the wall. When I tried to stop him, Her voice broke. "He told me if I didn't get out of his way, he'd kill the boy." "What did you do?" "I waited until Gideon passed out. Then I packed what we could carry and we left. In the middle of the night, we drove until the mule couldn't go any farther, and when I saw the notice for work at Ridge Hollow Ranch, I thought maybe—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I thought maybe we'd finally found somewhere safe." Ross nodded gently. "And when Gideon found you, what did he want?" "He wanted to punish me, to make an example. He didn't care about the children. He never did. He just couldn't stand the idea of me getting away." "Did you kill Gideon Carter?" The question hung in the air. "I shot him," Lila said clearly. "But Sheriff Daniels fired the shot that killed him." "Why did you shoot him?" "Because he was going to kill Mason Hale. Because he would have killed me next. Because I was done being afraid." Quinn's lawyer stood for cross-examination. "Mrs. Carter, isn't it true that you abandoned your lawful husband, that you took his children without his permission?" "He wasn't a husband," Lila said, her voice steady now. "He was a monster. And those children are mine. I carried them. I birthed them. I raised them. He just hurt them. But in the eyes of the law doesn't know what it's like to sleep with one eye open. Doesn't know what it's like to teach your children to be silent so they don't provoke rage. Doesn't know—" Her voice rose. "What it's like to choose between staying and dying or running and living." The lawyer tried again. "But you had no legal grounds." "I had the grounds of survival," Lila interrupted. "I had a 6-year-old with a concussion. I had a daughter who flinched every time a man raised his voice. I had a son who thought violence was how you showed love. That was my grounds." The courtroom was silent. The lawyer sat down. No further questions. Ross called Mason next. He testified about finding the notice, about hiring Lila, about the men who'd come with threats and guns. He testified about the fight, about Gideon's attack, about the moment he'd thought he was going to die. "And Mrs. Carter?" Ross asked. "What did she do when Gideon was choking you?" "She put a rifle to his head and told him to let go." "Did you think she would shoot?" Mason looked at Lila. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I'd seen what she'd already survived, what she'd done to protect her children, and I knew—" His voice roughened. "I knew she wasn't going to let him win, not after coming this far." The defense tried to paint Mason as a man who'd interfered in a marriage, who'd harbored a fugitive, who'd escalated violence. But Mason's answers were steady, his facts clear. He'd defended his property, protected a family in danger, done what any decent man would do. When the witnesses were done, Ross gave her closing argument. She spoke about the law's duty to protect the vulnerable, about the difference between legal authority and moral right, about the courage it took for Lila to run and the courage it took for her to stand and fight. "These men," Ross pointed at Quinn and the others, "came to that ranch with one purpose, to hurt a woman and her children. They came armed. They came with intent. And when they were met with resistance, they chose violence. The fact that they were working for a man with a fraudulent warrant doesn't excuse them. It condemns them." Quinn's lawyer argued that his clients were just hired hands following orders, that they'd believed the warrant was real, that they hadn't known Gideon's true intentions. Judge Whitmore listened to both sides. Then he sent the jury to deliberate. They were back in 2 hours. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, how do you find?" "Guilty, Your Honor." "On the charge of attempted murder?" Guilty. On the charge of assault with a deadly weapon? Guilty. The verdicts rang out one after another, each one driving another nail in Quinn's coffin. When it was done, Judge Whitmore sentenced them to 20 years hard labor in the territorial prison. Quinn's face went white. The others slumped in their chairs. Whitmore banged his gavel. As for the matter of Mrs. Lila Carter and the question of her actions, this court finds that she acted in lawful defense of herself and others. All charges against her are dismissed. Furthermore, custody of her children is hereby confirmed as residing solely with her, with no claim from the Carter family. Lila's knees went weak. Mason caught her arm, steadying her. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. It was over. Outside the courthouse, people crowded around them, some offering congratulations, some asking questions, some just staring. Lila ignored them all. She walked straight to her children and pulled them into her arms. "It's done," she whispered. "It's really done." Clara clung to her. Eli's shoulders shook. Noah pressed his face into her neck and held on tight. Mason stood nearby, giving them space, his battered face soft with something that looked like peace. Jacob approached slowly, hat in hand. "Mrs. Carter?" Lila looked up. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he said quietly. "But I want you to know I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure Gideon's name is remembered for what he really was, so no one else suffers the way you did." Lila studied his face, the shame, the determination, the genuine remorse. "You testified," she said finally. "You told the truth when it mattered. That counts for something. Does it count for enough?" "Ask me in a year," Lila said, "when you've proven it wasn't just words." Jacob nodded. "Fair enough." He turned to go, then stopped. "Those kids, they're good kids, better than we deserve to have in our family." "They're not in your family anymore, Lila said, not unkindly. "They're in mine." Jacob's mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Yes, ma'am, I expect they are." He walked away and Lila turned back to Mason. "Take us home?" she asked. Mason smiled, small and genuine and warm. "Yeah, let's go home." The weeks that followed settled into a new kind of rhythm. The children returned to their routines, chores in the morning, lessons in the afternoon, play in the evening. But something fundamental had shifted. They moved differently now, lighter, freer, like they'd finally learned that safety wasn't something you borrowed, it was something you built. Clara laughed more, real laughter that came from her belly instead of forced politeness. She started talking about things she wanted to do, learn to ride properly, maybe help teach the younger children in town, write stories in the journal Mason had bought her. Eli stopped watching the door. He started asking Mason to teach him ranch work, how to mend fence, how to gentle a horse, how to read the weather. And late one evening, as they worked together in the barn, he asked the question that had been building for weeks. "Can I call you Pa?" Mason's hand stilled on the leather he was mending. He looked at the boy, this serious, watchful child who'd carried too much for too long, and felt his throat close. "If you want to," he said carefully, "but you don't have to. I'm not trying to replace—" "You're not replacing anybody," Eli interrupted. "Gideon was never really a father. He was just there. And mostly there was bad." He paused. "But you're different. You teach me things. You listen. You don't—" His voice cracked. "You don't hurt people." Mason set down the leather and turned to face Eli fully. "I'd be honored if you called me Pa. But I want you to know something, son. Being a father isn't about blood. It's about showing up. Every day. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And I promise you, I'll show up." Eli nodded, blinking hard. "Okay, Pa." The words settled between them like a benediction. Noah adjusted fastest, the way young children do. Within a month, he was asking Mason to push him on the swing, to help him catch frogs by the creek, to tell him stories before bed. He stopped having nightmares, started sleeping through the night, and one morning at breakfast, he looked up at Mason with syrup on his chin and said, "You're my papa now, right?" Mason glanced at Lila. She nodded, her eyes bright. "Yeah, Noah, I'm your papa now." Noah grinned and went back to his flapjacks like it was the most natural thing in the world. Summer deepened into the heavy, golden heat of late August. The fields turned amber. The garden produced more tomatoes and beans and squash than they could eat. Lila spent long days canning and preserving, Clara at her side, both of them working in companionable silence broken by occasional conversation. "Mama," Clara said one afternoon as they sealed jars of peach preserves, "do you think you'll marry Mason?" Lila's hand stilled. "Why do you ask?" Clara shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "Just, you look at him different now. And he looks at you like you're the answer to something he's been asking for a long time." Lila set down the jar. "How would you feel about that? If I did marry him?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "I think I'd feel safe," she said finally. "Like we really belonged here. Like this was really home and not just a place we're borrowing." "This is home," Lila said firmly, "whether I marry Mason or not. This is ours." "But you want to, don't you? Marry him." Lila thought about Mason's steady presence, about the way he made her children laugh, about the quiet evenings on the porch when he'd sit beside her and they'd watch the sunset without needing to fill the silence with words. "I think I might," she admitted. "When the time's right." Clara smiled. "Good. He deserves someone who looks at him the way you do." "And how's that?" "Like he's home too." The conversation stayed with Lila through the following days. She found herself watching Mason with new eyes, noticing the care he took with the children, the gentleness in his rough hands, the way he always made sure she had the good chair on the porch, the one that didn't wobble. One evening in early September, as the air finally started to cool and the first hints of autumn touched the edges of the leaves, Mason asked her to walk with him. They headed out toward the creek, following the path the children had worn smooth with their play. The sun hung low and golden, turning everything soft and warm. Crickets sang in the grass. Somewhere in the distance, a mourning dove called. Mason led her to a spot where the creek widened into a small pool, clear and cool, surrounded by cottonwoods. "I used to come here with my wife," he said quietly. "Sarah," before she died. It was her favorite spot on the whole ranch. Lila's breath caught. This was the first time he'd offered her this. A piece of his grief. A piece of his past. "She'd sit right there." Mason pointed to a flat rock by the water's edge. "And read while I worked. Sometimes we'd just sit and listen to the water. It was peaceful." "It's beautiful," Lila said softly. "I haven't been back here since she passed," Mason admitted. "Couldn't bring myself to. It hurt too much." He turned to her. "But I wanted to bring you. Wanted you to see it." "Why?" Mason took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against hers. "Because I'm ready to stop living in the past. Ready to build something new." He paused. "With you. If you'll have me." Lila's heart hammered. "Mason, I'm not asking you to forget Gideon or pretend those years didn't happen," he continued. "I'm just asking, when you're ready, whenever that is, if you'd consider making this real, making us real, you and me and those kids, a family." Lila looked at him, this good, steady man who'd given her everything and asked for nothing, and felt the last piece of ice around her heart finally melt. "Yes," she whispered. Mason blinked. "Yes?" "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, we'll be a family. Yes to all of it." A smile spread across his face, wide and genuine and full of something that looked like joy. "You mean it?" "I mean it." Lila squeezed his hand. "You've already been more of a husband to me in 3 months than Gideon was in 14 years. You've protected us, provided for us, made us feel safe, and you've done it without expecting anything in return." "I expect plenty in return," Mason said, his voice rough. "I expect biscuits and sass, and 3 kids who'll keep me on my toes for the rest of my life." Lila laughed, bright and clear and free. "I think we can manage that." Mason pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and she let herself lean into his strength. They stood there by the creek while the sun set and the crickets sang and the world turned gold and amber and perfect. "When?" Mason asked against her hair. "Soon," Lila said, "before summer ends, while it's still warm and bright and beautiful. Before the season that gave us back our future slips away?" "Exactly." Mason kissed the top of her head. Then we better start planning. They were married 3 weeks later on a Sunday afternoon beneath the cottonwoods by the creek. Sheriff Daniels officiated, his deputy standing witness. Jacob Carter came, standing at a respectful distance, his hat in his hands. Mrs. Calloway brought half the women from town, all of them dabbing at their eyes with handkerchiefs. But the ones who mattered most stood closest. Clara wore a dress Mrs. Calloway had helped her sew, pale blue, with white ribbon. She held a bouquet of wildflowers and beamed. Eli stood beside Mason, serious and proud in his clean shirt and new suspenders, holding the simple gold band Mason had bought in town. And Noah darted between everyone's legs, his laughter echoing across the water. Lila wore a simple cream-colored dress that Clara had found in Mrs. Calloway's shop. Nothing fancy, but clean and pretty and hers. Mason wore his best shirt and vest, his hair combed back, his face freshly shaved. When Daniels asked if anyone objected, Noah shouted, "I don't! I want Mason to be my papa!" The crowd laughed. Mason grinned. Lila felt tears streak her cheeks, happy ones this time. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory," Daniels said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mason, you may kiss your bride." Mason cupped Lila's face gently in his calloused hands and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. The children cheered, the women dabbed their eyes, someone started clapping, and soon everyone joined in. When they pulled apart, Mason looked down at Lila with wonder in his eyes. "Mrs. Hale," he said softly. "Mr. Hale," she replied, smiling. Noah pushed between them. "Can I call you Mama and Papa now? For real?" Lila knelt down, bringing herself to his level. "You can call us whatever feels right, baby." Noah threw his arms around her neck. "Then you're my mama, and Mason's my papa, and we're a real family now, right?" "Right," Mason said, ruffling the boy's hair. "A real family." Clara and Eli joined the embrace, and they stood there by the creek, 5 people who'd found each other in the worst of circumstances and chosen to become something beautiful, while the world witnessed their new beginning, Mrs. Calloway had organized a celebration at the boarding house, tables laden with food, music from a fiddle player, dancing in the street. The whole town turned out, and for hours they celebrated. Children ran wild, adults laughed and talked, and Lila danced with Mason under the fading light, his hand warm on her waist, her head resting on his shoulder. "Happy?" he murmured. "More than I ever thought possible," she said honestly. As the evening wore on and the younger children started to fade, Mason gathered his new family and they headed home. The wagon rolled through the darkening countryside, stars beginning to emerge overhead. Noah fell asleep against Clara's shoulder. Eli watched the stars with quiet contentment. Lila sat beside Mason on the bench, his arm around her shoulders, and felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was what peace felt like. This was what home felt like. This was what love, real love, the kind that built instead of destroyed, felt like. When they reached Ridge Hollow Ranch, the house stood solid and welcoming in the moonlight. Mason carried Noah inside while Clara and Eli helped bring in the wedding gifts, quilts, and preserves, and kitchen goods from the townswomen. Lila stood in the doorway and looked at her house, her home, her future. No more running, no more fear, no more bracing for the next blow, just this, just them, just the life they'd fought so hard to build. Mason came up behind her, his arms circling her waist. "You all right?" "I'm perfect," she said, and she meant it. The months that followed brought the kind of ordinary joy Lila had only dreamed of. Autumn arrived with cool mornings and golden afternoons. They harvested the last of the garden and prepared for winter. Mason taught Eli how to repair the barn roof. Clara started helping Mrs. Calloway with her sewing business, earning her own money. Noah started school in town, coming home each day with stories and scraped knees and the confident grin of a boy who knew he was loved. Lila cooked and cleaned and managed the household, but it felt different now. Not like labor under threat, but like care freely given. She sang while she worked, hummed while she kneaded bread, smiled at nothing in particular because she could. Winter came soft and gentle, bringing just enough snow to dust the fields white. They celebrated Christmas together, the first Christmas Lila's children had ever known without fear. Mason carved Noah a wooden horse, Clara got fabric for a new dress. Eli received his first real pocket knife and looked at Mason with shining eyes. And Lila received a locket with a tiny portrait of her children inside, commissioned by Mason from a traveling artist. "So you always have them close," Mason said as he fastened it around her neck. She wore it every day. Spring arrived with wildflowers and new calves and the promise of another growing season. One evening in late April, as Lila stood at the stove making supper, she felt Mason's arms circle her waist from behind. "You're quiet tonight," he said against her ear. "Just thinking." "About?" Lila turned in his arms, looking up at him. "About how far we've come. About how this time last year I was running for our lives. And now," she gestured around the warm, lamplit kitchen, "now we have this. Do you ever regret it? Taking that job? Coming here?" "Not for a second," Lila said firmly. "Best decision I ever made." Mason smiled and kissed her forehead. "Best decision I ever made, too. Hiring you." From the other room came the sound of the children arguing good-naturedly over a game of checkers. Noah's laughter rang out, bright and clear. Clara told them both to hush before Mama came in there. Lila closed her eyes and breathed it in. The sound of her children being children, the warmth of her husband's embrace, the smell of supper cooking and coffee brewing and home. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For giving us this. For giving us a life where we don't just survive. We live." Mason pulled back enough to look at her. "We gave each other that. You brought light back into this house, laughter, purpose. I was just existing before you came. Now I'm living too." The timer on the stove dinged. Lila reluctantly stepped out of his embrace to check the roast. Mason moved to set the table, their domestic dance as natural as breathing. That night, after the children were tucked in and the house was quiet, Lila and Mason sat on the porch watching the stars. The air was warm and sweet with the smell of growing things. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "Mason?" Lila said quietly. "I'm pregnant." His head whipped around. "What?" Lila smiled, her hand moving to her still flat stomach. "I'm pregnant. About 3 months, the doctor thinks." Mason's eyes went wide. We're... He couldn't seem to finish a sentence. "We're having a baby," Lila confirmed. "Sometime in October, if the doctor's right." Mason stood abruptly, then sat back down, then stood again. "A baby. Our baby." "Our baby," Lila agreed, laughing at his reaction. He knelt in front of her chair, his hands covering hers on her stomach. "Are you happy about this?" "I'm terrified," Lila admitted. "But yes, I'm happy. Are you?" Mason's face broke into the widest smile she'd ever seen. "I'm more than happy. He shook his head, words failing. Then he leaned forward and kissed her stomach gently. "Hello in there, little one. Your mom and I can't wait to meet you." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "You're going to be a wonderful father." "I'm already a father," Mason said, looking up at her, "to 3 amazing kids. But getting to do this from the beginning, with you," his voice roughened, "that's a gift I never thought I'd get." They told the children the next morning at breakfast. Noah was thrilled, immediately declaring he wanted a baby brother. Clara looked thoughtful, then smiled and said she'd help however she could. Eli was quiet for a moment, then asked seriously, "Will there be enough room for all of us?" Mason ruffled his hair. "There's always room for family, son. Always." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Lila's belly grew round and full. The children talked to the baby, sang to it, told it stories. Mason treated her like she was made of glass, much to her amusement. "I've done this 3 times before," she reminded him when he tried to stop her from lifting a basket of laundry. "Not with me, you haven't," he said stubbornly, "and I'm not taking any chances." Jacob came to visit in late August, bringing gifts for the baby. Small clothes his own wife had sewn, a carved wooden cradle he'd made with his own hands. "I know I don't have a right to be part of this family," he said quietly as he handed them to Lila. "But I wanted the baby to have something from its uncle, if that's all right." Lila looked at the cradle, simple and sturdy and made with obvious care. "It's beautiful, Jacob. Thank you." He nodded, looking relieved. I'm getting married myself, next month. Woman from church. She's a widow with 2 kids of her own. I'm happy for you, Lila said, meaning it. I'm trying, Jacob said, trying to be the kind of man Gideon should have been. The kind those kids deserve. He paused. I hope you know. I'll never forgive myself for not standing up to him sooner. Then spend your life standing up for others, Lila said. That's how you make it right. Jacob left that afternoon, and Mason set up the cradle in their bedroom. It sat there waiting, a symbol of new life, new beginnings, new hope. On a cool October morning, as the leaves turned gold and the air smelled of smoke and apples, Lila's labor began. Mrs. Calloway came to help, bringing her experience in steady hands. Mason paced the hallway. The children gathered in the kitchen, anxiously waiting. The labor was long but not complicated. And as the sun set on another golden autumn day, a baby's cry filled the house. It's a girl, Mrs. Calloway announced, carrying the squirming, red-faced bundle out to show Mason. A healthy, perfect little girl. Mason's hands shook as he held his daughter for the first time. She was tiny and perfect, with a dusting of dark hair and eyes that would probably be brown like her mother's. She wrapped her tiny fist around his finger and held on tight. Hello, Sarah, he whispered, naming her for his first wife, honoring the past while embracing the future. Welcome home. The children crowded around, awed and gentle. Noah reached out to touch her tiny hand. Clara stroked her soft hair. Eli just stared, wonder written all over his face. She's so small, Noah whispered. You were that small once, Lila said from the bedroom doorway, her face pale but glowing. Mason brought the baby to her, laying Sarah in her arms. Lila looked down at her daughter, this child born into safety and love, who would never know fear in her own home, and felt her heart overflow. She's perfect, Lila whispered. Just like her mama, Mason said, kissing her forehead. That night, with the baby sleeping in her cradle and the children tucked in their beds, and the house quiet and peaceful, Lila stood at the bedroom window looking out at Ridge Hollow Ranch. 2 summers ago, she'd driven up to this place with nothing but desperation and hope. She'd been broken and afraid, running from a monster, certain that safety was something other people had. Now she had a husband who loved her, children who were thriving, a home that was truly hers, and a tiny daughter sleeping peacefully in a cradle made by the brother of the man who'd tried to destroy them all. Redemption came in strange forms. Grace arrived in unexpected ways. And sometimes, the season that began in fear and desperation ended with more blessings than you knew how to count. Mason came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her, his chin resting on her shoulder. What are you thinking about? About how that notice Cook wanted for the summer changed everything. Best hiring decision I ever made, Mason said. Best job I ever took, Lila replied. They stood together in the darkness, watching the stars emerge one by one. 2 people who'd found each other when they needed it most and built something beautiful from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Outside, the world turned on. Seasons changed. Life continued its relentless march forward. But inside Ridge Hollow Ranch, in that warm house filled with sleeping children and new life and hard-won peace, Lila Carter Hale finally understood what it meant to be home. Not just safe, not just surviving. Home. And that was everything.